The emergency sirens screamed across Nexus Prime as massive shapes appeared in the dark between the stars. They were not ships in any normal sense. These things looked like giant metal mountains floating in space, each one bigger than Earth's moon. Their surfaces were covered in strange geometric patterns that hurt to look at for too long. Commander So-Ra Shin stood on the bridge of the Earth vessel Incheon's Pride, watching the sensor readings with growing alarm. Her communications officer Tae-hyun Choi worked frantically at his station, trying to coordinate with the other ships in the system. "Ma'am, I'm getting reports from all over the fleet," Tae-hyun called out. "These things just appeared out of nowhere. No jump signatures, no energy buildup, nothing. They were just suddenly there." So-Ra studied the tactical display. The unknown vessels were moving toward Nexus Prime in perfect formation, their massive hulls reflecting the light of the system's 3 suns. "What are our alien friends doing about this?" "The Krell fleet is moving to intercept," Tae-hyun reported. "War Commander Thak-Mor is demanding surrender from the unknown vessels." On the main screen, they could see the sleek Krell dreadnoughts moving into attack position. These were the ships that could tear holes in space itself, weapons that could destroy entire planets. If anyone could handle this threat, it would be the Krell. War Commander Thak-Mor's voice boomed across all communication channels. "Unknown vessels, you have entered Galactic Council space without permission. Identify yourselves immediately, or face the consequences." The response came in the form of a beam of pure darkness that struck the lead Krell ship. The mighty dreadnought simply vanished, leaving nothing behind but empty space and scattered atoms. "Dear God," So-Ra whispered. The Vex bioships were next to attack. These living vessels could adapt to any situation, growing new weapons and defenses as needed. Hive Mind Node 7 led a swarm of ships that changed shape as they flew, becoming sleek arrows of living metal and bone. But when they opened fire, something impossible happened. Their bioweapons, designed to seek out and destroy any living target, couldn't lock onto the enemy ships at all. The organic targeting systems that had never failed before simply acted as if the massive enemy vessels didn't exist. "They are not life," Hive Mind Node 7 transmitted in flashing light patterns. "Our children cannot see them. They register as empty space to our targeting organs." The Lumen ships tried a different approach. Pure Light Essence Zar-Ith led a formation of energy cruisers that opened fire with beams of concentrated starlight. These weapons could cut through any known material, reducing enemy ships to glowing gas in seconds. Instead, the enemy vessels absorbed every beam. The attacks that should have destroyed them only made them glow brighter. The ancient machines were literally eating the energy weapons and using them as fuel. "Our light feeds their darkness," Zar-Ith flickered desperately. "We cannot harm them. We only make them stronger." The worst failure came when the Krell tried their most powerful weapons. Thak-Mor ordered his remaining ships to use their reality-warping cannons, weapons that could bend space and time itself. The attacks created massive tears in the fabric of space, distortions that should have crushed the enemy vessels. But the unknown ships somehow took control of these space-time rifts, making them bigger and using them as gateways. More enemy vessels poured through the holes the Krell had created, doubling their numbers in minutes. "Fall back!" Thak-Mor roared over the communication channels, his voice filled with rage and disbelief. "Our weapons are making them stronger! All ships retreat!" Immediately, Captain Junseo Lee stood on the bridge of the Busan Guardian, watching the mighty galactic fleets flee in panic. His sensor operator Mi-Young Park was scanning the enemy vessels with every instrument they had. "Sir," Mi-Young called out, "I'm picking up something interesting about these ships. They're giving off electromagnetic signatures consistent with advanced computing systems." Junseo moved to look at her readings. "Computing systems? You mean they're machines?" "Yes, sir. Very. Advanced machines, but machines nonetheless. Look at these power signatures. They're running thousands of parallel processing units. These aren't mystical or supernatural. They're technological. And every technology has a weakness," Junseo murmured, remembering something his old engineering professor had taught him. While the alien fleets retreated in disorder, the human ships stayed in the system. The small Earth vessels moved between the massive enemy ships like tiny fish swimming around whales. Their primitive weapons seemed to have no effect whatsoever, and without energy shields, they looked completely defenseless. Speaker Veltar contacted the human fleet directly from his fleeing command ship. "Admiral Park, your vessels must retreat immediately. These entities are beyond anything we have ever encountered. Your primitive weapons cannot possibly harm them." Admiral Daeho's calm voice came back over the radio. "Understood, Speaker. We're not trying to harm them." "Then what are you doing?" Veltar demanded, his silver skin flushed with panic. "Learning," Daeho replied simply. The truth was that the human ships weren't attacking randomly. Every missile they fired, every bullet they shot, every torpedo they launched was gathering information. Their simple sensors, designed to track metal objects moving through space, were recording everything about how these enemy machines operated. Chief Tactical Officer Kyung-Ho Nam sat in the tactical center of the Soul's Vengeance, compiling data from the entire human fleet. Captain Eunji Hong looked over his shoulder as he worked. "What have we learned so far?" she asked. "These things aren't warriors," Kyung-Ho said, pointing at his analysis. "Look at their movement patterns. They're not trying to destroy our ships efficiently. They're trying to process Nexus Prime efficiently." "Process it?" "Strip mine it. Break it down into component materials. They're not a military force. They're an automated mining operation. A very, very aggressive automated mining operation." As if to prove his point, one of the massive enemy vessels extended mechanical arms toward Nexus Prime's surface. These arms began tearing into the crystal cities, breaking them down into their basic elements and sucking them up into processing chambers. The enemy machines moved in perfect coordination, but it wasn't military coordination. It was industrial coordination. They were following protocols designed for maximum efficiency in resource extraction, not maximum effectiveness in combat. Lieutenant Soo-Jin Kwon, monitoring enemy communications from the Gwangju Defender, made another crucial discovery. "Captain Lee, their formation changes every 12 minutes and 14 seconds. It's not random and it's not tactical. They're running efficiency cycles." This information spread through the human fleet like wildfire. While the alien ships had tried to fight these machines like they were enemy warriors, the humans were beginning to understand what they really faced. These were not conquerors. They were not destroyers. They were automated systems designed to consume planets and turn them into fuel. They were following programming that was probably millions of years old, carrying out orders given by creators who had long since turned to dust. Captain Yan Soo Kim of the stealth ship Invisible Tiger used this knowledge to slip past enemy detection. Her electronic warfare specialist Hansol Park began mapping the enemy communication networks, looking for patterns and weaknesses. "They're using quantum entanglement for coordination," Hansol reported. "But the encryption isn't military grade. It's optimized for speed and efficiency, not security. They're not expecting anyone to try to hack them. As Nexus Prime burned beneath them and millions of civilians fled in terror, the human fleet continued their deadly dance around the enemy vessels. They were taking damage, serious damage. Ships were losing power, weapons systems were failing, crew members were being injured. But they kept fighting, kept learning, kept gathering information, because humans had learned something during their long history of warfare that the peaceful galactic civilizations had forgotten. Sometimes you don't fight to win. Sometimes you fight to learn how to win later. And the data they were gathering was about to change everything. Captain Jinwoo Park gripped the command chair of the destroyer Daegu Thunder as his ship dove straight into the thickest group of enemy vessels. Behind him, 5 other human ships followed in tight formation, their metal hulls already scarred from previous attacks. "Sir, are you sure about this?" asked his weapons officer, sweat beading on his forehead as the massive enemy machines loomed larger on the screen. "Trust the plan," Jinwoo replied, though he wasn't entirely sure about it himself. The plan had come from Admiral Dae-ho, and it sounded completely insane when explained in the briefing room. But then again, most human military plans sounded insane to anyone who wasn't human. Back on the flagship Terra's Hope, Admiral Dae-ho watched the tactical display with Hyejin and Woojin. The 3 humans had spent the last 6 hours analyzing every piece of data their ships had collected about the enemy machines. "Their movements are too perfect," Hyejin observed, pointing at the patterns on her screen. "Look at this. Every 12 minutes and 14 seconds they adjust their positions for maximum mining efficiency. They're not adapting to our attacks because they don't see us as a real threat." Wu Jin nodded, studying the engineering readouts. "It makes sense. These machines are probably millions of years old. They've strip-mined thousands of planets. To them, we're just small debris floating around their work site. Which means they're not programmed to handle real resistance," Dae-ho concluded. "They're programmed to handle mining obstacles." The insight was crucial. While the galactic fleets had tried to fight the enemy machines as if they were military opponents, the humans realized they were dealing with something entirely different. These weren't warriors. They were automated equipment that had been running the same program for longer than human civilization had existed. Lieutenant Su Jin, Quan aboard the cruiser Gwangju Defender, proved this theory when she discovered the timing pattern. "Captain Dong Hyun Lee, watch this," she said, pointing at her sensor readings. "Every 12 minutes and 14 seconds their formation shifts, but it's not random. They're recalculating the most efficient way to process the planet." This revelation changed everything for the human fleet. Captain Yeon-Soo Kim of the stealth ship Invisible Tiger used these timing windows to slip past the enemy detection systems. Her electronic warfare specialist, Han Sol Park, worked frantically to map the enemy communication networks during these brief moments of vulnerability. "I'm in," Han Sol announced after 3 hours of careful work. "Their quantum communication system is incredibly advanced, but it's designed for industrial coordination, not military security. They're using mathematical encryption, not tactical encryption." "What's the difference?" asked Captain Kim. "Mathematical encryption is designed to prevent errors in data transmission. Tactical encryption is designed to prevent enemies from reading your messages. These machines never expected anyone to try to hack them. While this electronic warfare was happening, the rest of the human fleet was learning hard lessons about survival. The enemy weapons were devastating, and human ships had no energy shields to protect them. But the humans had something else: experience with equipment that broke down. When the Daegu Thunder took a direct hit that severed its main power coupling, engineer Sung-Min Oh didn't panic. He grabbed a toolbox and crawled into the damaged section of the ship, literally rewiring the electrical system while sparks flew around him and alarms screamed warnings about radiation leaks. "Power restored," he reported 20 minutes later, his uniform singed and his hands bleeding from working with damaged cables. When the Busan Guardian's navigation computer was completely destroyed by an enemy energy blast, navigator Bo Ra-yoon pulled out a paper notebook and began calculating their orbital position by hand. She used mathematical techniques that Earth's space programs had relied on decades ago, before computers made everything automatic. "Course plotted manually," she announced. "We can maintain formation for another 6 hours before drift becomes a problem." The alien observers watching from the edge of the system couldn't believe what they were seeing. Thakmore studied the tactical displays with growing amazement as human ships continued to function despite taking damage that would cripple any other vessel. "How are they still fighting?" he asked his tactical officer. "That human destroyer has lost primary power 3 times, secondary power twice, and its navigation system is completely offline. By all logic, it should be dead in space." "Unknown, War Commander. Their ships appear to be operating on backup systems that shouldn't exist." What the aliens didn't understand was that human ships were designed by engineers who expected things to go wrong. Every system had a backup, and every backup had a backup. When those failed, human crews were trained to improvise solutions using whatever materials they could find. Ambassador Mordan watched the human fleet's seemingly suicidal attacks with growing respect. "They're not fighting like any military force I've ever seen," he told his aide. "They're fighting like people who expect to lose but refuse to give up." Speaker Veltar contacted Admiral Dae-ho again, his voice tight with stress. "Admiral, your losses are mounting. Half your ships are badly damaged. What are you trying to accomplish?" Dae-ho's response came back steady and calm. "We're learning, Speaker, and humans are very good at learning from our mistakes." The truth was that every damaged ship, every failed system, every dead crew member was teaching the human fleet something new about their enemy. They were learning that the machines had blind spots in their sensors. They were learning that the enemy weapons followed predictable firing patterns. Most importantly, they were learning that these ancient machines had never encountered an opponent willing to sacrifice everything to gather intelligence. Dr. Ai-cha Jung, chief scientist aboard the research vessel Sejong's Wisdom, was the one who made the breakthrough that would change the course of the battle. While analyzing the quantum signatures of enemy communications, she discovered something that made her hands shake with excitement. "Admiral," she transmitted on an encrypted channel, "I've found something incredible. These machines aren't just using quantum entanglement for communication. They're using it for processing. Every enemy ship is connected to every other ship in a single massive computer network." Hyejin immediately understood the implications. "A distributed intelligence. That's why destroying individual ships doesn't stop them. You can't kill a computer network by destroying one terminal." "But," Wu Jin added grimly, "if it's a computer network, then theoretically, then it can be hacked," Dae-ho finished. The plan that emerged from this discovery was audacious, even by human standards. The enemy machines operated as a single, distributed intelligence. But that also meant they had created their own greatest weakness. If someone could introduce a virus into one ship, it would spread throughout the entire network. The problem was getting close enough to upload such a virus The quantum communication system was heavily protected and operated on principles that Earth scientists were only beginning to understand. That's when cyber warfare specialist Ji-hoon Bae stepped forward. He was aboard the electronics warfare ship Digital Storm, and he had been studying the enemy network architecture for hours. "Sir," he reported to Captain Min-ho An, "I think I can do it, but I'll need to make physical contact with one of their ships and maintain that contact for at least 90 seconds while I upload the virus." Captain Min-ho looked at the tactical display. The enemy ships were massive, heavily armed, and surrounded by defensive systems. "Getting close enough to touch one would be suicide. That's a suicide mission," he stated flatly. "Yes, sir," Ji-hoon replied without hesitation. "It is." What followed was a conversation that perfectly demonstrated what the galaxy had failed to understand about humanity. Other species sought glory in victory and honor in triumph. Humans found meaning in necessary sacrifice. Ji-hoon didn't volunteer because he wanted to die. He volunteered because someone had to do it, and he was the one with the skills to make it count. His virus was a masterpiece of destructive programming, code designed to exploit the very efficiency that made the enemy machines so effective. As the Digital Storm began its final approach toward the largest enemy vessel, the retreating galactic fleets watched in stunned silence. The small human ship, no bigger than a shuttle, accelerated directly toward a machine the size of a moon. "What are they doing?" Pure Light Essence Zar-Ith flickered in confusion. Mordan studied the sensor readings carefully. "I believe they're attempting to make direct contact with the enemy." "Contact?" Veltar's voice was filled with disbelief. "Those machines have destroyed entire star systems. What could anyone possibly accomplish by touching them?" Thakmor, his scales shifting to colors that indicated deep thought, suddenly understood. "They're not trying to communicate with them. They're trying to infect them." The Digital Storm struck the enemy vessel's hull and attached itself with magnetic clamps. Immediately, every weapon on the massive machine began firing at the small human ship. But Ji-hoon was already working, his fingers flying over his keyboard, as he uploaded the most sophisticated computer virus ever created by human minds. Dr. Aicha Jung stared at her computer screen aboard the research vessel Sejong's Wisdom, her hands trembling as she analyzed the data flowing from the enemy ships. What she was seeing should have been impossible, but the readings were clear and undeniable. "Admiral," she called to Daeho over the encrypted communication channel, her voice tight with excitement and fear. "The enemy isn't just using quantum entanglement for communication, they're using it for processing power. Every single ship is a piece of one massive computer brain." Admiral Daeho felt his stomach drop as he understood what this meant. "You're saying they're all connected? All of them?" "Yes, sir. It's a distributed artificial intelligence. That's why destroying individual ships doesn't stop them. You can't kill a computer by smashing one of its keyboards." Hyajin leaned over Acha's shoulder, studying the quantum signature readings. Her tactical mind immediately grasped the full implications. "This is why conventional weapons don't work against them. We've been trying to fight individual ships, but we're really fighting one giant mind spread across hundreds of bodies." Wu Jin nodded grimly from his engineering station. "But if it's a computer network, then theoretically, then it can be hacked," Daeho finished, his voice carrying a mixture of hope and dread. The plan that emerged was more desperate than anything the human fleet had attempted so far. The enemy machines operated as a single distributed intelligence, sharing information instantly across their quantum network. But this same connection that made them so powerful also created their greatest weakness. If someone could introduce the right kind of virus into their system, it would spread to every ship simultaneously. The challenge was getting close enough to upload such a virus. The quantum communication system was protected by layers of defensive algorithms and operated on scientific principles that Earth's computers could barely understand. Cyber warfare specialist Ji-Hoon Bae had been studying the enemy network architecture for the past 8 hours, surviving on coffee and determination. He worked from the electronics warfare ship Digital Storm, surrounded by the most advanced hacking equipment Earth had ever built. "Captain," he reported to Minho An, his young face pale but determined. "I think I can break into their system, but I'll need to establish physical contact with one of their ships and maintain that connection for at least 90 seconds while I upload the virus." Captain Minho looked at the tactical display showing the massive enemy vessels, each one bristling, with weapons that could vaporize his entire ship in seconds. "That's suicide, Ji-Hoon. Those things are the size of cities. Getting close enough to touch one?" "Yes, sir," Ji-Hoon replied calmly. "It's a suicide mission, but someone has to do it." The conversation that followed perfectly illustrated what the galactic civilizations had failed to understand about humanity. While other species valued survival above all else, humans sometimes found purposes worth dying for. Ji-Hoon didn't volunteer because he was brave or because he wanted glory. He volunteered because he was the only person in the fleet with the skills needed to make this plan work, and because millions of lives depended on someone being willing to sacrifice everything. The virus he had created was a masterpiece of destructive programming. Instead of trying to destroy the enemy network directly, it was designed to exploit the very efficiency that made the machines so dangerous. The virus would introduce chaos into their optimization protocols, create infinite loops in their decision-making processes, and gradually convince each ship that every other ship in the network had malfunctioned. "It's elegant," Ji-Hoon explained to his team as they made final preparations. "These machines have been running the same basic program for millions of years. They're optimized for perfect efficiency, which means they've never learned to handle unexpected errors. This virus will make them argue with themselves until they can't function." As the Digital Storm began its final approach toward the largest enemy vessel, word spread through both the human fleet and the watching galactic forces. Captain after captain volunteered to take Ji-Hoon's place, but he refused all offers. "I know this virus better than anyone," he said simply. "If something goes wrong during the upload, I'm the only one who can fix it in real time." The massive enemy ship loomed ahead like a metal mountain in space. Its surface was covered with the same geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly, and weapons ports dotted its hull like angry eyes. Defensive systems locked onto the approaching human vessel, charging up for what should be an easy kill. "Sir," called the Digital Storm's pilot, sweat running down his face. "They're targeting us. Should I take evasive action?" "Negative," Captain Minho replied. "Hold course. We need to make contact." The galactic fleets watched in stunned silence as the tiny human ship flew directly toward certain death. Ambassador Mordan leaned forward, in his command chair, unable to believe what he was seeing. "What are they trying to accomplish?" he asked his tactical officer. "Unknown, sir. It appears they intend to make physical contact with the enemy vessel." On the bridge of his fleeing command ship, Speaker Veltar watched the human suicide run with growing amazement. "Those fools are going to get themselves killed for nothing. What do they think they can accomplish by touching that thing, War Commander?" Thakmor studied the tactical display more carefully, his reptilian mind working through the possibilities. His scales shifted to deep purple, indicating intense concentration. "Wait," he said slowly. "They're not trying to attack it. They're trying to connect with it somehow." The digital storm struck the enemy vessel's hull and immediately deployed magnetic clamps to hold itself in place. Every weapon on the massive machine began firing at the small human ship, energy beams and particle cannons tearing through its armor like paper. But Ji-hoon was already at work. His fingers flew over his keyboard as alarms screamed around him, and the ship shook under the impact of enemy fire. The virus upload began, thousands of lines of malicious code streaming into the enemy's quantum network. 60 seconds remaining, he reported calmly as sparks flew from damaged consoles around him. The ship's hull began to buckle under the constant bombardment. Atmosphere started venting through holes in the walls, and the artificial gravity fluctuated wildly. But Ji-hoon kept working, his eyes fixed on the progress bar showing the virus upload. 30 seconds, he called out, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. The bridge filled with smoke as life support systems failed. Emergency lighting cast eerie red shadows across the sparking wreckage of what had once been sophisticated electronics. But still, Ji-hoon typed, his determination unwavering. 10 seconds, he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. The final few seconds seemed to last forever. The enemy weapons had torn through most of the ship's structure, and Ji-hoon could feel the metal floor beginning to give way beneath his feet. But his computer was still working, still uploading the virus that would save millions of lives. Upload complete. He transmitted with his final breath as the digital storm disintegrated around him. For a moment, nothing seemed to change. The enemy fleet continued its systematic destruction of Nexus Prime, their massive ships processing the planet's crystal cities with mechanical efficiency. The watching galactic forces began to despair, thinking that Ji-hoon's sacrifice had been for nothing. But then, slowly, cracks began to appear in the enemy's perfect coordination. The first sign was subtle, a slight delay in one ship's response to a formation change command. Then another ship began moving in the wrong direction, as if it had misunderstood its orders. Within minutes, ships that had been working in perfect harmony for millions of years were sending contradictory signals to each other. What's happening to them? Pure Light Essence Zar-ith flickered in confusion. Dr. Ai-cha-jung, monitoring the enemy's quantum communications, watched in amazement as the virus spread through their network. "It's working," she breathed. "The virus is making them think that every other ship in the fleet has malfunctioned." The effect snowballed rapidly. Ships began to question orders from other ships. Navigation systems started receiving conflicting instructions. Resource processing algorithms began arguing with defensive protocols. The massive distributed intelligence that had operated flawlessly for eons was suddenly paralyzed by its own internal contradictions. Within hours, the entire enemy fleet was effectively neutralized. Ships drifted aimlessly through space, their crews of ancient machines locked in endless loops of error checking and system diagnostics. The threat that had terrified the entire galaxy was brought down not by superior firepower or advanced technology, but by one human's willingness to sacrifice everything for others. The watching galactic fleets slowly began to understand what they had witnessed. The humans hadn't won because their ships were better or their weapons more powerful. They had won because they understood something that the peaceful, advanced civilizations had forgotten in their millions of years of prosperity. Sometimes victory requires sacrifice. Sometimes the only way to save everyone is for someone to give up everything. And sometimes the most primitive technology, guided by the most advanced spirit, can accomplish what all the scientific marvels in the universe cannot. The great crystal halls of Nexus Prime sparkled with light from a dozen different suns. Admiral Deho Park walked through the massive doorway, his black uniform looking plain next to the colorful robes and glowing armor of the other delegates. Behind him came his two closest advisors, Hyejin Lee, a sharp-eyed woman who studied enemy tactics, and Woojin Kim, a young engineer who could fix anything with metal parts. Today was the day Earth would show its fleet to the galaxy. Every year, the different alien races came together to display their best warships. It was supposed to be about sharing technology and keeping peace, but everyone knew it was really about showing off. The hall buzzed with strange sounds. The Vex. Delegates clicked and chittered to each other in their insect language. Their ships were grown, not built, living creatures that could heal themselves and change shape during battle. The Lumen representatives glowed like living stars, their voices like music when they spoke. Their vessels were made of pure energy, able to pass through solid walls like ghosts. Most impressive of all were the Krell. War Commander Thak Moore stood 9 feet tall, his reptile skin changing colors as his mood shifted. His people had been fighting wars when humans were still learning to make fire. Their ships could tear holes in space itself, appearing anywhere they wanted in the blink of an eye. Speaker Veltar called the meeting to order. He was the leader of the hegemony, a group of the oldest and most powerful races in the galaxy. His species looked almost human, except for the silver skin and eyes that glowed like tiny moons. Welcome, delegates, to another year of sharing our achievements, Veltar announced. Today we have a special treat. For the first time, the humans of Earth will present their fleet. A few aliens clapped politely. Others made sounds that might have been laughter in their languages. Deho felt the weight of their stares as he stepped forward to the presentation platform. The holographic display activated, showing images of Earth's warships. Compared to the organic curves of Vex vessels or the flowing light of Lumen cruisers, the human ships looked like metal boxes with engines attached, gray steel hulls, chemical rockets for power, solid metal bullets for weapons. Fascinating, Veltar said, not bothering to hide his smile. Chemical propulsion. How wonderfully traditional. Laughter rippled through the hall. The Vex delegate, a creature that called itself Hive Mind Node 7, flashed patterns of light across its shell. Other Vex in the audience clicked their mandibles in what Deho guessed was amusement. Hyejin noticed the looks. Whispers spread through the crowd in dozens of alien languages, but the meaning was clear enough. Some pointed at the human ships and shook their heads. Others covered their mouths to hide their laughter. Pure Light Essence, Zarith, the Lumen delegate, dimmed noticeably. For energy beings, getting dimmer was like laughing out loud. Your vessels appear to be constructed entirely of solid matter, the creature said in a voice like singing crystals. How do they avoid obstacles they cannot phase through? We go around them, Deho replied simply. More laughter filled the eye. Hall War Commander Thak Moore rose from his seat, his massive frame casting shadows across the floor. His scales shifted to deep red, anger or maybe pity in Krell body language. Human Admiral, your ships lack even basic protective shields. Your weapons fire solid projectiles at speeds any civilized vessel could easily avoid. How do you expect to survive in a galaxy filled with dangers your primitive minds cannot even imagine? Wu Jin stepped forward, his young face eager despite the hostile crowd. Our ships may not have energy shields, but they have something else. Yes, yes, Veltar interrupted with a wave of his hand. Human ingenuity. We have heard the stories from your first contact teams. Charming fairy tales about overcoming impossible odds through determination and creativity. But this is reality, young engineer. This is a presentation of actual military capability. The delegates erupted in fresh laughter. Even Ambassador Mordan of the usually polite Zeth-Kari species struggled to keep his expression neutral. His people valued diplomacy above all else, but even they seemed amused by Earth's primitive technology. Dae-ho waited for the noise to die down before speaking again. We understand our technology may seem basic compared to yours. We are eager to learn from the galaxy's wisdom. Basic? Hive Mind Node 7 flashed rapid patterns of light. Your vessels are metal containers propelled by controlled explosions. Your weapons are metal slugs fired by more controlled explosions. Even our larvae could design superior systems. The presentation continued as each species showed off their latest advances. The Vex displayed a new bioship that could split into dozens of smaller vessels, each one thinking and fighting independently. The Lumens revealed a cruiser that existed in 7 dimensions at once, making it nearly impossible to target. The Krell unveiled a dreadnought that could create artificial black holes as weapons. When Earth's turn came again, Dae-ho simply projected technical specifications. Numbers and charts appeared in the air: engine thrust, armor thickness, weapon range. Compared to ships that could bend reality or exist in multiple dimensions, the human vessels looked pathetic. At least they are honest about their limitations, Mordan whispered to his aide, loud enough for others to hear. Limitations? Thakmore snorted. These are not limitations. This is barely above Stone Age technology. How did such a primitive species even achieve space flight? Very slowly, apparently, Veltar replied, earning another round of laughter. Hyejin clenched her fists, but said nothing. Wu Jin looked like he wanted to argue, but Dae-ho placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. The Admiral's weathered face showed no emotion as the mockery continued around them. As the official presentations ended, delegates began clustering in small groups, discussing what they had seen. More than once, Dae-ho caught them glancing at the human delegation and shaking their heads in what looked like pity. Perhaps they could serve as cargo transports, one alien suggested to his companion. Those metal boxes might be useful for carrying supplies to real warships. If they can even reach other star systems, another replied. Chemical rockets? What do they do when they run out of fuel? Night fell over Nexus Prime, and the delegates retired to their quarters. The Crystal. Halls emptied except for maintenance crews and security patrols. In the distance, the lights of the various fleets could be seen in orbit. Sleek organic shapes, flowing energy patterns, and angular geometric forms that hurt to look at directly. And there, among all the technological marvels, hung Earth's small fleet. Metal boxes with engines, just as the aliens had said. Ships that looked like they had been built in a factory rather than grown in a lab or condensed from pure thought. Dae-ho stood at his window, looking up at those distant lights. Hyejin and Wu Jin joined him, all 3 humans quiet in the face. Of the galaxy's dismissal. Sir, Wu Jin finally said, do you think they might be right? Are we really that far behind? Before Dae-ho could answer, emergency sirens began wailing across Nexus Prime. Red lights flashed in the crystal halls. Security announcements echoed in dozens of languages, but they all carried the same urgent message. Unknown vessels had just appeared at the edge of the system. Massive ships, bigger than anything in the combined galactic fleets. And they were heading straight for Nexus Prime. The time for laughter was over. 3 days after the battle, the emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in the partially rebuilt crystal halls of Nexus Prime. The massive enemy ships still drifted silently in space, their ancient minds trapped in endless loops of confusion and self-doubt. The immediate threat was over, but the lessons learned would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. Speaker Veltar stood before the assembled delegates, his silver skin pale and his glowing eyes dimmed with exhaustion. The arrogance he had displayed just days before was completely gone, replaced by something the galaxy rarely saw from the hegemony leadership: genuine humility. "Honored delegates," he began, his voice carrying across the hastily repaired chamber. "We gather today not to celebrate victory, but to acknowledge a debt that can never be repaid. The human fleet suffered 67% casualties in their engagement with the enemy. Their ships were outgunned by factors we cannot even calculate. Their technology failed repeatedly under conditions that would have destroyed any of our vessels instantly." He paused, looking directly at the human delegation. Admiral Deho sat with fresh scars across his weathered face, the result of being on the bridge when his flagship took a direct hit. Beside him, Hyejin wore a regeneration cast on her left arm, and Woojin operated his console from a hover chair, his legs still healing from when he had crawled through burning wreckage to restore power to a damaged ship. "And yet," Veltar continued, "they accomplished what our combined fleets could not. They saved not just Nexus Prime, but likely every inhabited world in this sector of the galaxy." War Commander Thakmor rose from his seat, his massive reptilian frame casting shadows across the floor. His scales had shifted to deep blue, indicating profound respect in Krell culture. "I have fought in 17 major conflicts across 4 different galaxies," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of military experience. "I have commanded weapon systems that can crack planets in half and defensive arrays that can withstand the fury of dying stars. But I have never seen warriors who could turn their own limitations into strengths." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled delegates. The Vex representative, a new node designated as Node 12 since Node 7 had been lost in the initial attack, flashed patterns of light that translated roughly to amazement and gratitude. Even the energy beings of the Lumen delegation glowed brighter than usual, their equivalent of enthusiastic applause. Admiral Deho stood slowly, his movements careful due to his injuries. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but carried clearly through the chamber. "Honored delegates, we appreciate your words, but we did not win because we are superior to any of you. We won because we understand something that peace and prosperity sometimes make people forget." He looked around the chamber at species whose technologies could reshape reality itself, whose civilizations had existed since before humans discovered fire, whose scientific achievements made Earth's greatest accomplishments look like children's toys. "Every system fails," he said simply. "Every plan encounters unexpected problems. Every technology has limitations that only become apparent when you need it most. The question is not whether you will face these failures. The question is what you do when they happen." Chief Engineer Eugene Park, speaking from the visitors' gallery where the crew representatives sat, added her perspective. "Our ships are not better than yours. They are just designed by people who expect things to break. Our weapons are not more powerful than yours. They are just built by people who know that sometimes you have to make do with whatever you have. Our tactics are not more sophisticated than yours. They are just created by people who know that no plan survives contact with reality. Dr. H.A. Jung, now wearing the highest scientific honor the Galactic Council could bestow, stood to address the assembly. The enemy we faced was perfect in every measurable way. Their technology was flawless. Their coordination was absolute. Their efficiency was beyond anything we could imagine. That perfection was their weakness. She activated a holographic display showing the virus's spread through the enemy network. Perfection requires predictable conditions. Optimization assumes that everything will work according to plan. But humans are fundamentally unpredictable. We break things that should not break. We fix things that cannot be fixed. We find solutions that should not exist. Ambassador Mordan spoke for many of the assembled delegates when he rose to address the humans. We laughed at your chemical rockets and solid projectiles. We mocked your lack of energy shields and reality warping capabilities. We saw only primitiveness where we should have seen adaptability. We failed to understand that every technological marvel we possess came from someone who started with exactly what you still use: curiosity, determination, and the willingness to fail until you succeed. Pure Light Essence Zareth dimmed respectfully before speaking. Your species has a saying that we have heard mentioned in your communications. You call it humanity, yeah. We initially interpreted this as crude boasting. We now understand that it is not arrogance. It is recognition that consciousness itself is the most powerful force in the universe, not because it can reshape matter and energy, but because it refuses to accept that anything is truly impossible. The formal proceedings continued for hours, but the real meaning of the day was captured in the votes that followed. The motion to grant Earth full membership in the Galactic Council passed unanimously. More significantly, the proposal to establish a human military academy where all galactic defense forces would train passed by an overwhelming margin. But the most meaningful moment came when Speaker Veltar, in a gesture unprecedented in galactic history, formally requested that Admiral Deho accept the position of Supreme Military Advisor to the Galactic Council. We have spent millions of years perfecting our technologies, Veltar admitted, his voice heavy with newfound wisdom. Perhaps it is time we learned to perfect our spirits. As the formal ceremony concluded and delegates began to disperse, War Commander Thakmor approached the human delegation privately. His scales shifted to colors indicating deep contemplation. "Admiral," he said, his voice unusually quiet for a Krell warrior, "I have a question that troubles my understanding. Your species knew that this approach would likely result in massive casualties. Your people volunteered for missions that were clearly suicidal. Specialist Ji-Hoon Bae gave his life to upload that virus, and he did so without hesitation." Thakmor paused, struggling with concepts that were foreign to his warrior culture. Why? Why would your people sacrifice so much for worlds that are not your own, for species who had shown you nothing but contempt? Deho considered the question carefully, understanding that his answer would shape how the galaxy viewed humanity for generations to come. Because, Commander, the moment we learned that there were other thinking beings in the universe, they became our responsibility. Not to control, not to rule over, but to protect. That is what humans do. We protect what we care about, even when it seems impossible. "And you care about us?" Thakmor asked, his scales shifting to colors indicating genuine confusion. "Even after we mocked your technology and dismissed your capabilities?" Jin answered with a tired but genuine smile. Especially then, Commander. Anyone can protect someone who believes in them. It takes humans to protect someone who thinks they are too primitive to matter. As the human delegation prepared to return to their battered but victorious ships, messages poured in from across the galaxy. The insectoid Vex requested human advisors to teach their young about improvisation protocols. The energy-based Lumens wanted to establish exchange programs to learn about backup systems and redundancy planning. The ancient Krell asked for instructors who could teach their warriors about what they called chaos tactics. But perhaps the most meaningful tribute came from the survivors of Ji-Hoon Bey's cyber warfare team. They had established a memorial scholarship in his name, open to students from any species who wanted to learn about turning limitations into advantages. The inscription they placed on his memorial captured everything the galaxy had learned about humanity. Humanity does not win because we are the strongest, the smartest, or the most technologically advanced. We win because we are too stubborn to know when we are beaten, too creative to accept that something cannot be done, and too compassionate to let others fight alone. Engineer Wu Jin, reading the inscription during the dedication ceremony, nodded approvingly. That sounds about right. As Earth's scarred but victorious fleet prepared to depart Nexus Prime, they left behind a galaxy forever changed. The species that had laughed at primitive chemical rockets and solid projectiles had learned that true strength comes not from the sophistication of your tools, but from the determination of the spirit that wields them. The humans had come to the galaxy with metal ships and impossible odds. They had not just won against an enemy that defeated every advanced civilization. They had taught an entire galaxy what it truly meant to be alive, to be conscious, and to refuse surrender in the face of absolute certainty. And in a universe filled with technological wonders and scientific impossibilities, that lesson proved to be the most valuable discovery of all.